so listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath, turn off the lights, leave the world behind, and get ready to drift. Between Dreams and Shadows. The first whisper came just after 2:17 a.m., but Iris didn't hear it then, not clearly. It was buried beneath the hum of her refrigerator and the soft static of the rain tapping its anxious fingers against the windows of her apartment. Outside, the city slouched into its usual late-night desolation, a maze of wet concrete, flickering street lamps, and empty crosswalks. The world, it seemed, was asleep. Everything except her. Iris hadn't planned to be awake so late. Her job, remote graphic work for a faceless firm on the other side of the country, meant she rarely had to follow a schedule. But even by her erratic standards, 2 a.m. was pushing it. She blamed the insomnia, but it had never felt like normal insomnia. It wasn't just an overactive mind or too much caffeine. It was something else, something closer to dread. Her apartment sat at the edge of the city, an old brick building with narrow stairwells and rusted mailboxes. She'd moved in 6 months ago, drawn by the low rent and the promise of isolation. It had seemed perfect. The nights began to stretch longer than they should, until silence itself began to feel engineered inside. The apartment was small and quiet, adorned with second-hand furniture and her own digital artwork, dark, abstract pieces that even she couldn't fully explain. A dim floor lamp near the bookshelf cast a warm but weak light, throwing her elongated shadow across the walls like a silent twin. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, barefoot on cool wooden floors, her cat Nellie slinking at her side. The air felt still, not stale but paused, as if it were waiting. She paused at the window, brushing aside the curtain, and stared out at the wet street below. There was no movement, no cars, no headlights. Even the traffic lights blinked into nothingness, unnoticed by a world that had stopped watching. Then there was that feeling again, not a sound, not a sight, a presence. It didn't startle her. It never did. It was subtle, an edge, a pressure, like something behind a closed door, leaning ever so slightly against it from the other side. She couldn't see it, couldn't define it, but it was real. It had grown familiar, like the creak in the floorboards, or the whine of the pipes when the heat clicked on. Only this wasn't mechanical, this was aware. She turned away from the window and moved back into the bedroom, trying to shake the sensation. Nellie stopped just short of the doorframe, her tail flicking back and forth. The cat stared at something behind Iris, something in the room she had just left. But when Iris turned, there was nothing. Just the empty living room, bathed in the muted gold of the lamp. "Come on, Nell," she whispered. Her voice sounded too loud, even though it was barely above a breath. She patted the bed, trying to coax the cat into joining her. But Nellie stayed where she was, unmoving, unblinking. Something pulsed through the walls then. A sound too low to register, more like the memory of sound. A frequency felt in the teeth, in the back of the skull. A tension that pressed against the brain like an intrusive thought. It passed, Quickly, quietly, still. Iris hesitated. She stood in the center of her room and scanned the corners. The darker ones where the lamp's glow couldn't quite reach. She didn't know what she was expecting. Maybe a shape, maybe eyes, but there was only stillness, framed by her own trembling breath. Eventually, she climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, closed her eyes, and in the moment before sleep could claim her, she heard it again, a whisper, so soft it might have been part of her dream. Just a single word. It didn't sound hostile or kind. It was just curious. Iris. She opened her eyes. Nothing. No one. The lamp still glowed. The window still wept with rain, and Nellie had vanished from the hallway. She waited for the fear to spike, waited for the surge of panic, the adrenaline, but it didn't come. Instead, there was only a quiet resignation, a feeling that whatever had spoken her name already knew it would be answered. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, and deep in the marrow of her bones, she understood something vital. It had already begun. The next day passed in a sluggish blur. Iris barely remembered what she had eaten. Her screens, once windows into work and distraction, felt heavy and lifeless. Colors looked muted. Faces on video calls moved just a second out of sync. It was as if reality had been stretched thin overnight, like the skin of a balloon pulled too tight. And through that tension, something watched. She told herself she was tired, that it was all in her head. But even as she typed responses into email threads, she found herself glancing sideways at corners. Reflections, the slow movement of shadows that didn't seem to match the source of light. She began to notice little things. The painting in the hallway, a crooked print of a desolate beach, was off-center, just barely. She had straightened it countless times before, but today it listed again to the right, like it was subtly resisting her attempts to normalize it. She adjusted it once more, pressing the frame against the wall until it was even. 10 minutes later, when she returned from the kitchen, it was crooked again. Her kitchen chair had shifted too. Not much, maybe an inch, but it faced a different direction. It pointed not toward the table but toward the window, as though something had been sitting there, watching the rain, watching her. Nellie had changed as well. The normally affectionate cat now avoided her completely. She hid under furniture, tail bristled, ears twitching, toward sounds Iris couldn't hear, and when Iris tried to coax her out, Nellie would hiss off defensive and stare at something just behind her shoulder, always just behind her. When the light began to dim in the late afternoon, Iris didn't turn on the lamps right away. She let the shadows come, watched them crawl along the baseboards, like something alive. She sat on the couch, unmoving. As the corners of her apartment blurred into grayscale silence, that's when the tapping started. Faint at first, from the wall behind the bookshelf. 3 short taps, then silence, then again, tap, tap, tap. Like fingernails on drywall. Not aggressive, rhythmic. She turned off the TV. The static from the paused menu vanished, and the room fell into thick quiet. She stood and moved slowly toward the wall, pressed her ear to the plaster. Silence, then dash tap, tap, tap. This time, directly beneath her palm. She yanked her hand back. The rational part of her mind scrambled for explanations. Pipes, settling vibration from neighbors. But no one lived in the unit next door. That apartment had been empty for months, sealed off, according to the building manager, due to water damage and black mold. She backed away slowly, heart thudding, mouth dry. As night descended fully, she turned on every light in the apartment, room by room. Her movements were stiff, cautious. She avoided looking in mirrors. They felt too deep tonight, like something behind her. Reflection might not be content with just imitating her. Later, while brushing her teeth, she noticed her toothbrush had moved. It was small, barely perceptible, but she always placed it horizontally, across the ceramic holder. Now it sat diagonally, pointing toward the bathroom door. That's when she saw it. A shape only for a moment in the corner of the mirror behind her. No detail, just an absence of light, a distortion of space, as if the air itself had thickened in that one place. She spun around. Nothing. The bathroom was empty. The towel swayed slightly on its rack. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, every light blazing, heart hammering, softly but constantly in her chest. The tapping had stopped, but the sense of being watched had not. It never did anymore. The apartment wasn't empty. Not in the way she used to believe. As the hours wore on and the city outside faded into silence, Iris caught herself whispering to no one, "I didn't mean to hear you." There was no reply. But somehow, that felt worse than if there had been. It began again, around 3 a.m. Not with tapping, not with movement. This time, it was sound. Iris had been lying in bed, wrapped tightly beneath her weighted blanket, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sleep had become a stranger, and the silence of the apartment now felt like a heavy presence, one with expectations. She didn't dare turn off the lights. They cast pools of warmth across her floors and walls, but their reach was limited, leaving much of the apartment in a grainy, shifting twilight. And then came the sound, a whisper delicate and careful, like breath drawn across cracked glass. It wasn't coming from outside, not the hallway, not the street. It was inside her apartment. Iris. The voice didn't echo. It didn't bounce. It didn't vibrate in the air like normal sound. It sank into her skin, into her bones. It was like being remembered by something old, something slow, something patient. She sat up slowly, eyes scanning the room, her breath held tight in her lungs. The voice didn't come again right away, but the room had changed. She couldn't explain how. Had moved. The furniture was exactly as she left it, but the feeling of the room had shifted. The air now seemed to hum, so faintly she could only perceive it if she stopped breathing. A deep, low tone, not mechanical, not electrical, more organic, almost like it was thinking. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. As she stepped into the hallway, the hum deepened, like she had passed through an invisible membrane. The air felt thick, as though she were underwater. Light bulbs flickered not with mechanical failure, but with a kind of hesitation, like they were reconsidering whether to continue shining. She moved slowly toward the kitchen. That's when the whisper returned. Not behind her, not beside her, from within the walls. At first it was unintelligible, murmurs stacked atop one another, like an old radio tuned between stations. But as she got closer to the sink, a few words surfaced, half spoken, half thought. She knows. Opened the line. Waiting. Watching. The voice wasn't male or female. It wasn't human, exactly. It didn't sound threatening. It didn't need to. It understood her. She staggered back, gripped the counter to steady herself. Her mind screamed for logic, for reason, for anything to explain what she was hearing. But it wasn't just hearing anymore. The sound felt connected to her, like it threaded into her veins. Her phone sat on the counter. She grabbed it instinctively. No service, no Wi-Fi, just a single notification on the lock screen. Do you hear it now? The screen blinked. The message vanished. Iris dropped the phone. It landed face down on the tile. She didn't pick it up. Something moved in the hallway. Not with... The air shifted. The pressure changed, as though something large and invisible had moved across the floor. Then stillness. She stood motionless in her kitchen, sweat beating down her neck, eyes straining to see anything in the unnatural. Quiet. From somewhere deeper in the apartment came a new sound. Not a whisper this time. A hum, a long, steady vibration, like the first breath of an ancient machine waking up. Not loud, just inevitable. It passed through her, not around, not above, through. She knew then that the sounds were not meant to be heard by ears. They were meant for something else. something deeper, something she hadn't used in years, or perhaps never knew she had. She backed into her bedroom, closed the door slowly. Not slammed, not locked, as if any of that would matter. The whisper came one last time before dawn, gentle, patient. "You're listening now." And for the first time, Iris didn't deny it. She was. By the next night, Iris had stopped pretending she was alone. It wasn't about fear anymore. Not entirely. Fear was a reaction, a sudden burst of panic or instinct. This was different. What she felt now was awareness, an abiding realization that the space she lived in no longer belonged to her alone. Her apartment, once a place of silence and solitude, now breathed with something unseen, something other. It didn't announce itself with violence or spectacle. There were no slamming doors, no screams in the dark. That would have been easier. That would have been clear. What haunted Iris was subtlety so refined and careful that it almost made her question if it was happening at all. Almost the presence made itself known in small gestures, the kind that crept beneath your skin before your mind could catch up, like her keys, which were always placed in a ceramic bowl near the door. That morning, they weren't there. She tore through the apartment in frustration, checking pockets, drawers, even the freezer in a moment of desperate irrationality. Hours later, when she returned from a walk to clear her mind, they were back in the bowl, lying neatly, perfectly arranged, as if someone had cleaned around them. Then there was the bedroom mirror. It wasn't large, just a circular antique piece, hung above her dresser. But at night, something was different about it. The glass darkened not with shadow, but depth. It no longer reflected. It watched. Standing before it gave her the distinct sensation of being scanned, as if a great faceless thing were pressing its attention against her from the other side. She covered it with a towel. The next morning, the towel was folded and placed gently on her pillow. She told no one. Who was there to tell? She hadn't spoken to her parents in weeks, and the few friends she maintained contact with were distant, casual. No one would understand. And Nellie had begun to change. The cat no longer ran from the invisible, but sat and stirred often, at empty corners, or door frames, or beneath the bed. She would emit low, soft growls, not in fear, but warning, as though she saw the shape behind the nothing. Sometimes, in the early hours of morning, Nellie would raise her paw slowly and swipe at the air delicately like she was touching something that didn't belong. Iris started sleeping in the living room, wrapped in a quilt on the couch, every light on. She kept her phone clutched against her chest, despite its constant loss of signal. The screen often flickered at odd intervals, glowing faintly with backlight even when turned off. One night, the screen lit up for a few seconds, revealing a series of strange symbols where the time should be. Not letters, not numbers, just strokes and shapes, lines that made her stomach tighten without knowing why. The presence never touched her, but it moved around. She would hear soft creaks behind her steps, as though someone were always half a second behind. She'd feel a coolness drift past her ear, as if a breath had been exhaled mere inches from her skin. The air in the hallway had changed. Temperature, it was always colder there now. Regardless of the season, objects had their own intentions. Now, the bedroom door would never stay closed, always found cracked open in the morning despite her locking it. The clock above the kitchen sink had started ticking louder, not faster, louder, so loud in fact, that she removed the batteries one night out of pure frustration. The next morning, it was ticking again. The batteries were still in her hand. She began to whisper back. At first, it was nonsense, mumbled fragments in the quiet hours, like lullabies to herself. But the words began to flow, unbidden, old phrases. Some in languages she didn't recognize. Her voice changed in those moments, softer, deeper, detached. And always, when she came back to herself, she would find Nellie staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Judging. Morning. Then came the dreams. If they were dreams, she would wake without remembering, when she had fallen asleep, lying in strange places, the floor beneath the couch, the foot of her bed, once even in the open hallway, closet. No blankets, no memories, just cold skin and the knowledge that she had moved during the night. Not sleepwalking. Not really. More like being led. The whispers returned regularly now. Still soft. Still just outside comprehension. But closer. Always closer. She began to avoid her reflection entirely. Not out of fear that she'd see something in the mirror, but out of fear that she wouldn't recognize herself anymore. Because isolation, she now understood, did not mean being alone. Not in this place. Not anymore. There was a rhythm to it now. Not chaos. Not madness. A design, something patient and exact, stitched into the seams of Iris's days like thread through cloth. The presence in her apartment no longer felt random. It had a purpose. A pattern. It was showing her something. And it was doing so with care. She noticed it in the objects. First, 3 knocks on the wall. 3 pages torn from the old notebook she hadn't opened in years. 3 drops of water from a faucet that never leaked. The number repeated in quiet insistence, scattered throughout her environment like breadcrumbs. Her eyes, once frantic and searching, had grown numb to shock. Now they analyzed, noticed. Her thoughts turned like gears, behind glass, absorbing the impossible with eerie calm. She began to write down what she saw, not as a means of escape but as if taking dictation. At first it was just notes, descriptions, small anomalies catalogued in hurried handwriting. Then, her journal began to shift tone. Entries turned poetic, repetitive, the same phrases appearing, over and over, without her remembering having written them. The whisper is not the voice. The whisper is the door. The shape waits in mirrors, but walks without them. 3 is the number. The invitation. The price. The writing didn't feel like hers. It was looser, more fluid, like her hand was being gently guided. One evening, she returned from the market, her first trip outside in days, and found the entire apartment rearranged. Subtly, but unmistakably. Chairs were placed at slight angles, all facing toward the hallway. Books, once stacked haphazardly, were arranged by height but only in 3s. The salt shaker, long kept beside the stove, now rested precisely in the center of her dining table, surrounded by 3 concentric circles of spilled pepper, and in the hallway, drawn faintly on the wall with what looked like charcoal, was a symbol. Not one she recognized. A circle divided into thirds, intersected by 3 vertical lines. When she reached out to touch it, her fingers burned cold, not painfully, but sharply, like the sudden plunge into deep water. That night, the whisper didn't speak her name. It gave her instructions, soft, clipped phrases, spoken one at a time across the span of hours. She didn't write them down. She remembered them without effort, as though she had known them all along and only now had been reminded. Prepare the space. 3 points. 3 offerings. Open. Observe. Obey. There was no threat in the tone, just gravity. A sense of inevitable unfolding, like a ritual long delayed. Iris obeyed. She didn't know why, or rather she did. She felt it in the marrow of her bones. A kind of inherited knowing, like a distant ancestor pressing instructions into her bloodline. She began to dream vividly, not of monsters or faceless shadows but of structures, corridors made of lightless stone, spiral staircases descending endlessly, a house with too many doors, always dim, always damp, always watching, and always, in the center, a figure turned away, standing still, waiting. One morning she woke to find 3 feathers on her pillow. They were not from any bird she recognized. Long, thin, almost translucent, like strands of smoke hardened into shape. They pulsed faintly with warmth. She didn't touch them. She left them there. That same day, a book arrived at her door. No postage, no name. Just a plain black cover with no title. Inside, blank pages till the center, where a single phrase had been pressed deep into the paper. Some doors are questions, others are answers. This one is listening. The more she looked at the book, the more she felt it had always belonged to her. Something was coming. Not violently, not suddenly, but with the steady approach of high tide. She could feel it filling the cracks of her home, rising gently around her ankles, waiting for her to step in fully. The signs were no longer subtle. They were invitations, and Iris, against her will, or perhaps perfectly in line with it, was beginning to respond. It had been 3 days since the book arrived, 3 nights of silence. No whispers, no shifting shadows, no rearranged furniture, only the weight of anticipation. Iris didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. Silence, she had learned, was not peace. It was the breath held before a scream, the hush before a blade drops. Something had changed, not ended, shifted. The air in the apartment no longer felt merely heavy. It felt charged, as though the walls hummed with withheld knowledge, waiting for her to act, as if the presence was no longer reaching toward her. It was waiting for her to reach back. The pressure was subtle, but constant, a dull thrum beneath her thoughts. She began to feel it outside her apartment, in the hallway, in the elevator, even in the streets. A shadow at the periphery of perception. Faces seemed unfamiliar. Buildings looked slightly altered, as though their blueprints had been redrawn. In dreams, there were 2 versions of the world now, the one she used to know, and the one beneath it. And Iris had started to prefer the second. She became drawn to patterns. Her walks turned ritualistic, always 3 left turns, always ending near the old, abandoned chapel on Edding Street. It had no signage, no stained glass, just a rusted gate and a door that never opened. She never tried it, not yet. But each time she stood before it, she felt as though the air became denser, warmer, like the threshold recognized her. Inside her apartment, the symbols had multiplied, not drawn by her, not consciously, but she would wake to find them scratched faintly into condensation on the bathroom mirror, etched into the steam on the kitchen window, or appearing in the dust on the bookshelf. 3 shapes, 3 lines, 3 circles. The book, still open on her table, had changed. Its pages were no longer blank. They now contained sketches, crude, almost childlike drawings of rooms that matched hers perfectly. But in each image, there was something extra. A faint silhouette in the corner. A shadow not cast by anything visible, always faceless, always turned toward her. The whispers returned on the 4th night, only 1 word, now. It came not as sound, but as constant as though she had agreed to something she didn't remember signing. But there was no panic, no resistance, just stillness. That night, she found herself at the center of her apartment, barefoot on the cold floor, arms at her sides, breathing slow and even. The lights flickered once and then extinguished entirely. The darkness that followed wasn't pure black. It pulsed, it shifted, textured like velvet in the wind. She opened her mouth, not to scream, not to question, to receive. No words passed her lips, but her thoughts stretched outward. She didn't know what she was asking. She only knew that the act of asking mattered. The shadows responded. Walls seemed to fold inward. Ceiling and floor bent toward one another. Not collapsing, but transforming. The room was no longer square. It had become something more complex, some impossible geometry that denied logic but invited awareness. And in the middle of it all, a figure, not human, not monstrous, something between, a suggestion of form rather than a body. It did not move toward her. It did not threaten, but it knew her. She felt it in her blood, her teeth, the roots of her hair, a recognition that crossed timelines and lifetimes. She was not chosen, she was claimed, and in that moment, Iris understood the truth. The signs had never been random. The whispers were not warnings. The presence was not an intruder. It was a return. She had always belonged to something else. This place, this feeling, this watchful stillness, it was not alien. It was home. There was a choice to be made. She could retreat, flee, seal the doors, and deny what she had become, or she could step through, not into madness, but into alignment. The line between fear and surrender had thinned, and with her heart slowed and her vision dimming beneath the press of something vast and eternal, Iris took a single step forward. She whispered, "I'm ready." The presence did not answer. It accepted. When Iris woke, it was not to daylight. It was to the absence of time. There was no morning anymore. No ticking clock. No birdsong through the windows. No humming refrigerator in the kitchen. Everything that had once marked the passage of life had paused, suspended like dust in still air. The apartment remained as she had last seen it, same furniture, same layout, but everything washed in a sepia glow, as though the sun had set behind a filter of old film. The colors were muted, but nothing was darker. It was simply drained, like the light no longer remembered how to warm. She sat up slowly, and her movements made no sound. Not her feet on the floor, not her breath, not even her heartbeat. A world of silence wrapped around her like velvet, thick and deep. Not oppressive, but final. She was no longer in her apartment. Not exactly. The layout remained, yes, but there were no windows. The doors led to rooms that stretched too far or turned in impossible ways. She opened the bathroom door to find a staircase descending into black stone. Her bedroom had no ceiling, only a sky of dull copper, flickering, with distant pulses like dying stars. This was not a dream. She had crossed something, not a threshold, not a portal, but a decision. Every choice she'd made had led here. Every whisper she'd followed. Every time she hadn't run. There was no fear left, only awareness. She walked barefoot through her home, which had become a vessel and echo of her will, shaped by something older, deeper. The walls murmured faintly now, not in voices, but in impressions. Memories she didn't recognize as her own. A mother brushing her daughter's hair in a candlelit room. A figure walking backward down a staircase that never ended. A small box buried beneath floorboards that no longer existed. In the center of what had once been her living room stood a mirror, not the circular one she had covered weeks ago. This was tall, reaching from floor to ceiling, framed in wood too, dark to identify. It did not reflect her. It did not reflect anything. Instead, it shimmered, its surface rippling like oil disturbed by breath. As she approached, something moved behind it. Not her reflection, but her opposite. The figure inside mimicked her steps, but wrong. Its head tilted when hers remained straight. Its hands moved half a second too slow. Its eyes, if they were eyes, gleamed with the absence of color. And as she drew closer, it raised one hand slowly, placing its palm flat against the glass. Iris did the same. Their hands met, not with a touch, but a sensation, a pressure, a memory pressing against skin. And then Nit smiled. Not wicked, not joyful, just aware. A soft hum grew in her ears, building like the tide. Her body remained calm, still, receptive, but her mind strained against the shape of what she was feeling. It was not horror. It was not awe. It was truth, a kind of knowledge that could not be unlearned. This place, this mirror world, this hushed dimension between fear and surrender, was her. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. It was Iris made manifest. All her silence, her solitude, her quiet ache for meaning, it had answered. And in doing so, it had reshaped reality in her image. But there was no return. She now saw what the presence had always been. Not a ghost, not a demon, not even a watcher. It was a mirror of longing. Drawn to those who called out without knowing. It responded to disconnection. It thrived in the cracks left by grief and loneliness. It did not take. It invited, and Iris had answered. The mirror began to dissolve at the edges, dripping like black wax onto the floor. The figure within remained, unmelting, until only its face was visible, then eyes, then nothing. The silence broke. A whisper, spoken not aloud but within, "You are home." The sound was not comforting, not cruel, simply, true. Iris didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She smiled faintly, and walked away from the mirror, deeper into her new world, her slow, soundless cathedral of shadows. Days no longer passed in Iris's world. There were no clocks, no seasons, no delineation of time or space. But still, things moved, slowly, intentionally, the way tides shift sand, even when no one watches. She now lived in a place made of suggestion, not matter. Her apartment had become a memory of walls breathing faintly, its shadows curling inward like sleeping creatures. Light existed, but only as a haze, like the fading remnants of dreams at dawn. It illuminated nothing, it hovered, and the whispers. They never left. They no longer needed language. They were the language, a hum beneath thought, a quiet ache behind the eyes, a constant, low pulse that reshaped how she perceived everything. Iris never left the apartment, or perhaps there was nowhere left to go. The door still stood at the end of the hallway, but it led only to another version of the same room, slightly altered, slightly off. She stopped opening it. Sometimes she would sit for hours, cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, and feel the presence beside her, not touching, not speaking, just there, like gravity in human form. It was never threatening. It was never gone. It was hers. And yet, the fear had not vanished. It had evolved. No longer the sharp panic of the unknown, but something slower, deeper, a fear not of harm, but of knowing too much, of seeing the structure behind the curtain and realizing it had always been staring back. Iris was not alone. She never had been. She now understood that others had come before her. She felt them, sometimes in the flicker of her own shadow, sometimes in the way a breath echoed in a room that should have been still. Each one had answered the whisper. Each one had crossed the mirror. Each one had disappeared without a trace, and yet they had not left. Their stories were embedded in the walls, in the dim patterns etched beneath the peeling paint, in the throb of the floorboards beneath her bare feet. Some had surrendered fully, becoming part of the architecture. Others lingered in the corners, half there, half gone, unsure if they'd truly chosen this, or merely failed to resist. Iris didn't know what kind she was. Sometimes she would speak, aloud, not to communicate, but to remind herself that her voice still existed. But even her voice sounded changed, not flatter, like it had been translated through a different mouth. And in the quietest moments, she wondered, what had her life been before this? What had she lost? But those thoughts didn't stay long. The presence didn't allow them to root. There was no room for nostalgia here. Only now. Only presence. Then came the dreams, not hers. They were memories, fragmented images of strangers waking in unfamiliar homes, hearing soft voices through vents, staring into reflective surfaces that blinked back. Different cities, different faces, but always the same feeling. Something watching, something waiting, something that knew their name. Before they did, Iris began to understand. The whisper was not singular. It was networked, a web spun across minds, through time, catching those who drifted too far from the light. Those who were vulnerable, disconnected, open, she had answered, and so would others. And when she felt it, the moment a new presence rippled faintly through the walls, she did not speak. She did not intervene. She simply turned her head toward the hallway, as if listening to an echo only she could hear, and whispered to no one, "Welcome home." She no longer feared what she had become, but if she had a voice left beyond this place, if some part of her still lingered in the world above, in the minds of those listening, It would say. Be careful who you listen to in the dark. Some whispers don't seek answers. They offer them, and sometimes, the answer is you.